Welcome to our Business Strategy Basic Contracts Part 2 session of the peer-to-peer series with New Bedford Creative. We got a lot of people here, that's great. My name is Marianella Perry, the Senior ARPA Fellow at New Bedford Creative. Thank you so much for joining us. This peer-to-peer series is geared to enrich, educate, and connect creatives within our community. New Bedford is the home of artists, creatives, change makers, designers, entrepreneurs, and community enthusiasts. And the peer-to-peer session embraces the pulse that makes New Bedford so unique while also expanding our knowledge and connections. And I'd like to take this time to thank MassDevelopment, TDI, and the Barr Foundation for funding this program. This is just one component of a broader TDI Creative Cities initiative to boost arts-based economic development. So now I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Dennis Santoro, consultant, who will present to us about the business strategies, but more specifically about basic contracts.
Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm Dennis Santoro. I know a lot of you from the names I'm seeing in the participants section. Today, I'm going to be going over sort of the basic issues that need to be covered in contracts. I have a presentation that talks about some of the things you need to think about, not how they need to be answered, but but that they need to be considered. And then I will be going over sort of a plain English version of contract that we used when I was running S&G Project Gallery, which is now just a brokerage. I have provided some links to Marianella that she'll put in the chat at some point for you to be able to download the slides that I'm going to be presenting and download the contract version of the contract in normal size type, not large type, and a version of the contract with the more detailed actual contract that would get signed. Basically, what I wanted to cover are the basic things that you need to know when you're dealing with a third party, whether you're the seller or whether you're the third party providing the work. It's important to know that there are a bunch of things that should be spelled out clearly and agreed to ahead of any presentation of work. First thing, determine if the work is going to be offered for sale. There are a number of ways that people show, and not all of them involve actual sales. For example, if you were to show at the art museum, oftentimes, the New Bedford Art Museum, oftentimes you're not showing with a sale capacity, you're just showing. If the work is going to be for sale, you need to determine who's responsible for the transaction. And I'll talk more about that as we go on, but sometimes it's the artist who's responsible for the transaction, sometimes it's the venue, sometimes it's a mix, but it needs to be clear. And if you're not going to be offering the work for sale, you have to figure out what your compensation will be. You should be getting compensated one way or another if you're providing work to a venue. And exposure is not compensation. You get exposure even when you're being compensated. Sometimes people will rent your work. Sometimes there's a hanging fee involved for doing the work of putting the show up. Sometimes the work is on lease. Sometimes you are able to provide signage with QR codes so people can link right to a space where it can be purchased online through their phone. Should always be some sort of link to your online presence and some way to refer potential buyers to you if you're not being offering the work for sale right there on the spot. You also need to be careful to be sure who's responsible for work on display. What happens if your work gets damaged or stolen? Does the venue have insurance for your work? A lot of venues do not cover insurance for the work, and insurance can be fairly expensive for our work. Also, it's difficult for some venues because they would have to appraise for every single show. Do you as an artist have insurance for your work? Sometimes you can have a rider on your homeowner's insurance. Sometimes you have a special package for work that's out or work that's in storage. Those are things you should investigate, or you can self-insure. And self-insuring is the way most artists do it. They just take the risk and then absorb the risk if they have a loss. But know how it's being done. Okay. Also, does the venue have security? Are there people watching the work at all times, or is it in a public space that people can come and go and there are no employees around? Is the hanging system secured? Some hanging systems are such that somebody can just walk by and take a piece of work. Some hanging systems are such that you need special tools to get something off the wall. It's good to know what, especially if you're in a space where no one is actually watching the work on a regular basis. And how will the work be protected? Is there a security camera? Is somebody watching the work regularly? Is there an employee in the space at all times? Is the work locked when there's nobody around? Another thing is that a lot of, particularly galleries, deal with various levels of exclusivity, and you should be clear what how exclusive or non-exclusive any place that you're showing is. Can you offer the same work for sale in other venues simultaneously? Say, for example, you're showing a bunch of prints and you have, runs of 10. Can you have those pieces that are in this show in another venue that are also for sale? Can you offer copies or variants of the same work? Say, for example, you're showing a bunch of original paintings, but you have prints of them. Can the prints be available elsewhere, or can they be available in this venue that you're showing the actual paintings? Needs to be clear. Can you offer other similar work for sale in other venues simultaneously? This is more normal, where you have a series of work, for example, and in that series of work, you have some showing in a show, and you have other parts of that series showing somewhere else. And that work would be considered similar, would even be potentially considered the same body of work, but not the same pieces. And can you offer other dissimilar work? Some galleries want you to be exclusive. If you're showing in their gallery, they don't want you showing anywhere else except your online presence. Be careful of that, because it's usually not a good situation for the artist. And how long will the relationship last? This is one of the things that's most often missed in contracts. Does the show have a fixed end date? Does the relationship have a fixed end date? A show may be up for a month, 6 weeks, and the relationship maybe lasts for a year. Whereas somebody who comes to buy a piece of work they saw in a show, you're still responsible for providing something to the gallery where they found it. Is there a termination procedure? Does it terminate automatically as of a certain date, or do you have to actually sign another piece of paper to terminate the agreement? Are there obligations for either party after the exhibit ends? This is an important consideration. If a gallery puts a show up, then puts all the work into advertising it, etc. And then a week after the show comes down, you were contacted by somebody who saw the show and wants to buy the work. It's somewhat unethical to then sell it directly without bringing in the party that introduced you to and the buyer. If the work is for sale, who's responsible for the transaction? You were the third party. Will it go through a purchase of sale system at the gallery, or will you have to actually handle each transaction as the artist? Who gets compensated, and how and how much? Is there a commission? Is there a fixed fee? Some galleries, you rent the gallery out, they still do the sales, but then they're making their money on the rental, and all of the money for any sales goes to you. most galleries work on a compensation model where they sell the work, they handle their transaction, and they take a commission, usually an exorbitant one. I don't think commissions should be over 40% myself, because without the artist and the art, there is nothing for the gallery to sell. And who are responsible for related costs, sales tax, shipping, etc. This should be clear. Somebody has to be responsible for sales tax unless you're selling in a tax-free zone. And Massachusetts aren't many of those, or unless you're selling to a tax-exempt buyer. So somebody has to handle that. If there's going to be any shipping involved, shipping art can be very expensive, especially if it's already framed and complete. If you're shipping a print, it's a whole different story. Discount agreements. This one is a little tricky. Some galleries will do discount agreements, some galleries will not. You have to consider whether a discount is worth making the sale, and how much, and that should be clear and in the contract up front. For example, we would max out any discount at our gallery at 10%, and we would not allow it for any negotiation of discounts if they weren't buying at least 2 pieces. You can set up whatever rules you want, but you should make sure that they are clear. Also, you need to know how any discount gets distributed. Does it come out of your pocket? Does it come out of the gallery's pocket? Does it come out of both pockets? I am of the opinion that it should come out of both pockets equally. If the work isn't for sale, you want to figure out how you're going to receive your compensation. If there's a hanging fee involved, you should get paid right after you hang the work. If there's a lease agreement, then you should get some money up front for the leased art, and you should get some of the money at the end, or there can be payment points. If you get it all up front, that's fine too. But leasing is a fairly normal agreement, especially nowadays. A lot of real estate agents are leasing work so that they can stage houses. And will you be, for any compensation, also you want to know how you're going to get it. Again, exposure is not compensation, but if you're going to be getting if you're going to be getting something like, you're promised an article will be published in, Art Scope or something, you want to make sure that that's actually going to be done, and that you see that there's an arrangement. Other things you want to consider. This one, I was surprised when I started running a gallery how many artists brought work without a formal inventory. You want to have every piece of work that you show up with on a list, and then you want to make sure that any ones that are actually taken for the show are signed off on, and then when they're returned, you want to make sure that they're signed off on and that as having been returned. You also want to be clear who's paying for what exhibition expenses. The more you as an artist pay, the lower the gallery's cut should be. So are you paying for advertising, or is the gallery, or are you splitting it? How about opening, reception, food and drink? Transportation and hanging expenses. You have to bring the work to a location, and it is in fact work to hang the show. Who's actually responsible for that? Will there be cards and announcements issued? Who's handling any advertising, whether it's social media advertising or magazine advertising or whatever? Another piece that often gets missed is if expenses are going to be shared, what's the ratio of the share? What specific expenses will be shared? And how will we agree that we're going to spend that money before it actually gets spent? So if you agree that you're going to split the cost of doing a show card, then you want to quote on the show card, and you want to agree that you will in fact pay that much. If you're going to be putting an ad in an art magazine, and you're splitting that cost, you want to make sure that that you know what that cost is, and that you both agree to it. Another thing people don't think about too often is rights and responsibilities of any photos of the work in the gallery, by the gallery or by visitors. Normally, a gallery will say that they're in a contract will say that they're allowed to use images of your work for their advertising purposes, but no other purposes. It's important that if that's the case, that's clear. You don't want them taking images of your work and then reselling the images of your work. You also, if you don't want pictures being taken of your work in a show, you want to make sure that the gallery is clear about that as well. Sometimes it's good, people put it on the social media and that gets more people into the show. Sometimes people, are sneaky and they take pictures of things and then they produce them themselves rather than pay you. So you want to be somewhat careful of that. When we ran the gallery, we kept people from taking close-in pictures or pictures of just a single piece of work without a chunk of wall behind it, so that it would be hard to reproduce. Also, you want to be clear who's making curatorial decisions. Are you deciding what hangs with what? Are you deciding what actually hangs in the show, or is the person who's actually owns the space doing that, or are you working collaboratively? That's a wide range of considerations, and that can turn into a contract. Basically, a contract is going to cover these things. You and I agree we're going to work together to show and sell art. I'm going to represent your work and try and bring in buyers and sell it. You'll help however you can. Other people can represent your work, but not what is in the gallery while it's in the gallery. These were the terms that we used. These can be changed depending on contract and the nature of your work. So I get a part of the sale price and you get the majority if the work sells. That was how we did it. I'll be honest and fair with you. I expect you to be honest and fair with me. You'll not try to make arrangements to sell your work directly to people who saw it in the show, so as to avoid the commission. See people doing that, and I think it's highly unethical to do that. Also, if someone wants to buy a work from the show that they saw in the show, or contacts you to see other work that they saw in the show, I still connected you to the buyer, so I still want to cut for a period of time afterwards. We usually kept it to a year after the show. Same holds true for commissions. If somebody you get a commission because you were in a show that that I put out, then I expect some slice of the commission as well. And we can negotiate on price up to a certain percentage. Since that lowers the price, the commission goes down as well. You get to decide if this is an option, and if so, what percentage you're willing to reduce your price by. Again, you should never expect somebody to try and reduce the price for you. You should expect that to be a last resort to make a sale. You should insure your work just like you do when it's in your space, and I'll be very careful with it. You attest that you actually created the work and have the copyright. This is important. If you cannot violate somebody else's copyright when creating work. There are fair uses of other people's copyrights, but you need to attest that the copyright to the work you're showing is yours.
So at this time, we're going to open it up for questions. This from Hannah is asking how to get the attention of galleries you feel aligned with.
That's a perennial tough one. First thing is to actually show up. You want to see what the gallery's showing, what kind of work they're showing. So check their past exhibits, show up at the gallery during openings or at other times, particularly at other times when you know the principals in the gallery will be there, and talk to them. Ask them what kind of work they're looking for, what kind of arrangements they make. Some galleries only want to find people themselves. Some galleries are happy to have people walk through the door. But don't assume that because you have a conversation with somebody, it's going to turn into you showing at their gallery. You will be turned down at times. You will be accepted at times. It's important to keep getting yourself out there. But the more you do it in person, or you can do some cold contacts, but cold contacts should never be the only way you do it. If somebody sends you, if you send, a note or email and a couple of images, and follow up with a phone call or follow up with a visit. One cold email is not going to do it. Guarantee you that most gallery owners consider cold emails like that to be just slightly better than spam.
The next question we have is, when you copyright a show, do you pull together the work as a cluster, or do you copyright each piece individually? This is from Paula.
Okay. First off, the fact that you created it means it's already copywritten. Okay. You don't have to register your copyright. If I'm registering a copyright, then I do each image individually. And you can do this online through the Copyright Office. You don't have to pay somebody to do it. But the fact that you have created something automatically gives you a copyright. I think it's a good idea to put a notice of copyright on the back of the work, or somewhere inconspicuous on the work. All of my images have a copyright notice on the back, and saying, copyright by me, the year it was copywritten, and all rights reserved, which is really all the notice you need. And you don't even need that. Again, copyright is a weird area of law, but the fact that you create something means it's copywritten. And once you've created it and put it out in the world, you don't have to put it out there for sale. You just have to, you can't create it and hide it under a basket, say, okay, copywritten, although technically it is. But basically, first showing is the point at which copyright actually kicks in.
Just real quick about the last question. Did you say there's a Copyright Office online you can find?
Yeah, you can register your copyright for a piece. U.S. Government Copyright Office.
U.S. Government Copyright Office. Okay, thanks. I haven't heard of that.
It used to be only possible to do on paper, but and again, it's not 100% necessary. Also, if you have electronic images, I should mention this. If you have electronic images of your copywritten work that are not actually electronic images, make sure the copyright is in the EXIF information on the work itself as well. You can get to the EXIF information on any image these days by bringing it up on your computer. And usually whatever you're using to view, if you right click onto it, or if it's on your phone, it'll be like an info button. We'll bring up the EXIF information. And one of the fields in the EXIF information is usually copyright, but if not, you can just put it in as a caption.
I have one from Hannah. Do you raise the price of your work when you are sending to galleries? And also, do you ever sell prints as opposed to originals through galleries?
That's an individual decision. I sell my work at the price I sell my work. And if it's being sold through a gallery, I'm taking a hit. But I don't think it's a good look to have things that you sell at one price yourself and at a higher price in a gallery. I think you're discounting yourself. Your work should be, what the market will bear for it. And if you're selling through a gallery, basically you're paying a salesperson. So if you're selling through yourself, basically you are the salesperson. So I really believe that, most people should keep their prices what their prices are, regardless of whether they're selling in a gallery or not. How you price your work, whole different story. That's an issue that artists have argued about as long as there have been artists, probably, or at least as long as there have been money. But yeah, I would not. You can, but if people see your work, like online at a certain price and then in a gallery at a price that's much higher, what does that tell them about your work?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think you can find that people are always asking for discounts too, so it really help. But
Yeah, and discount's okay if it's the only way to make the sale, but I would never go
Right.
10%. And again, usually only discount if somebody's buying more than one piece. So if they're buying more than one piece, you're going to have a little bit more money in your pocket anyway, even at a discounted price. And sometimes that makes the difference between a sale and no sale, but it's not something that I recommend, and it's not something I would offer. It's something somebody would have to ask me for.
So thank you for this class, first of all. I am very grateful. I have a question about contracts. I'm wondering, like, when do you see contracts? When do you see contracts? Should you be writing contracts? And, what are some things to look for in contracts?
If the venue does not offer a contract, then you should.
Okay.
So have something ready, know what you're willing to negotiate for. And if you're going to be showing anywhere, if you're going to be showing in a coffee shop, you want to sign something that says who's responsible for what, because, you really want them to sell the work off the wall. You want them to sell the work off the wall. You don't want them to have to come to you, or the buyer to have to come to you. That almost never works. And if somebody were to just grab something and take it and run, well, you want to know who's responsible. You want to know what they might try and do to protect the work, so I mean, what if, some child decides that they want to put their sticky hands all over it, things like that happen. So it's important that, the various responsibilities, day-to-day care and feeding of your artwork in any venue are covered. They'd be a little different depending on what the venue is. If it's a gallery, it's going to be, fairly comprehensive. If it's a coffee shop, clarity of, what the arrangements are important. And you can go back and look at practice best practices showing for exposure workshop. We talk a lot about that, especially how not to show for exposure, because exposure is not compensation.
I heard you say that if someone came in 2 years afterwards and to purchase my work, which was at an exhibit at your gallery, that you felt that you would be entitled to some kind of commission.
For 1 year after a show, our contract had, some contracts are for longer periods, some contracts are for shorter periods. We had a standard 1 year after the show closed, for that to be that there still be a commission arrangement, on the assumption that any buyer who saw your work in our show that we were producing might take as long as that to decide to make a purchase, or may want to come to you and at some point after that. A lot of buyers don't feel any compulsion about working around a gallery. They go to galleries and then they try and talk to the artist directly, and thinking that, oh, now I can buy it for less because the gallery is not involved. First off, you should sell it for the same price that it was up for in the gallery, not say, oh, I'm going to sell it to you minus the commission. So there shouldn't be an incentive for them to work around you.
Yeah.
But secondly, if somebody found you because you were in a show at a particular gallery that you wouldn't have found you otherwise, or you not as likely to have found you otherwise, I think the fact that the gallery did the advertising, did the work to get your stuff out there for a period of time. And again, that's a negotiable period of time. You can decide if a gallery wants it for too long. But I think that it's important that that relationship continues for a reasonable period of time.
Will you be doing additional presentations in the future? And if so, will a best practices in pitching your work to galleries or museums be one of them?
we sort of did that at Practice Best Practice. The one we did last fall is about helping creatives to sell, and and Anthony and from the drawing room and Jody Sievert from One by One talked quite a bit about how you approach designers and galleries and stuff, and ways to do it well and ways to do it badly. So that video is available online, and you might want to go check that out. I would strongly encourage you to. And it is a workshop that that we may address again. It's not my particular area of expertise. I try and focus most of my personal stuff in workshops on the entrepreneurial side, the business side, because I think artists often do not understand that they are a business, and they need to treat themselves as a business, because anything you do in hopes of compensation is a business enterprise.
I want to thank you all for your time this afternoon. This was a great session. You're welcome, Taylor. And I'd also like to thank Den once again for all of his hard work. And I'd like to thank our funders, MassDevelopment, TDI, and the Barr Foundation for making this possible.